My sister smirked and called me the family's failure. Her boss reacted dangerously. The gala at the Riverside Convention Center smelled like money. Expensive florals and champagne, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent. My sister Victoria wore a dress that probably cost $8,000. I knew because I'd seen the invoice when she asked if she could deduct it as a business expense. She couldn't, but she tried anyway. My father's hand found my mother's back. That gesture. The one that said, "Look at our daughter." At Victoria. Always Victoria. She was laughing, that practiced, carefully calibrated laugh that made everyone around her lean in closer. She was talking about her latest project. A penthouse complex. 40 stories. The most ambitious mixed-use development in the city's history, she said, and my mother actually glowed with pride. That's when my father noticed me, standing 5 feet away, invisible until he needed to acknowledge the person he'd forgotten. "Oh, there's Rebecca," he said, as if I'd just materialized from thin air. From nowhere. From the kind of place where people who don't matter suddenly appear, when convenient. His hand never left my mother's back. His eyes never quite focused on my face. "Girls, this is Rebecca. She does buildings too, I think. Something with blueprints. Structural and municipal architecture," I corrected quietly. I just completed the county courthouse renovation. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was something worse. The silence of someone trying to remember if they'd asked about your job before and already forgot the answer. My mother turned back to Victoria immediately. "Honey, tell them about the sustainability features on the Harborside project." I stood there, a 41-year-old woman, 2 architecture degrees, a consulting firm that had saved 47 companies from bankruptcy, thousands of jobs, thousands of people who had careers because of work I'd done quietly, invisibly, without any expectation of recognition. But my family saw me as a failure. For the first time, something crystallized inside me. Not anger. Something harder. Irrelevance. 6 months earlier, Victoria had called. "I need help with something," she said. Voice light, as if she weren't asking me to rearrange my entire life. I should have said no. But she was my sister. And I didn't know yet that saying yes would cost me more than money. It would cost me 18 years of pretending I didn't exist. "What kind of help?" I asked. "Commercial properties. Just a few assessments. You're good at this technical stuff, right?" I was good at it. That was the problem. She needed someone to review structural assessments for a commercial properties acquisition. 12 commercial properties. Multiple complex issues. I agreed immediately, rearranging my entire schedule, pushing back client meetings, working late nights analyzing blueprints. What started as a quick review became weeks of intensive analysis. The first property had critical pilings issues, the kind that could lead to catastrophic structural failure. The second had dangerous structural compromises from unauthorized renovations. The third had zoning complications that could have derailed the entire acquisition. I created 30-page reports. Spent 70 hours analyzing spreadsheets and blueprints. Made cold calls to suppliers, to banks, to city officials. Victoria never asked what I'd found. Never asked how much work it took. She just took my reports and moved forward. Moved forward without ever saying thank you. Moved forward without ever acknowledging that I'd saved her entire deal. The deal closed successfully. Victoria received her $340,000 bonus. The article in the Denver Business Journal praised her meticulous review process and attention to structural integrity. No mention of the structural engineer. No mention of the invisible woman who'd made it all possible. Then came the financing crisis. 3 weeks before closing, something happened that would change everything about how I saw my sister. A key venture capital firm abandoned the deal. Victoria called in panic. She would lose the earnest money deposit. All credibility would evaporate. Her career would stall before it had really started. I had just received a state retainer of $380,000. It was meant to cover my associates' salaries and consultant fees for 3 months. It was meant to sustain the business I'd spent 15 years building. I was insane. But I also couldn't watch my sister fail. I wired her $320,000. I'll pay you back in 2 weeks, she promised. As soon as the closing happens. 2 weeks passed. The deal closed. Victoria received her bonus. $340,000. She never mentioned repayment. When I called her 3 times and texted twice, she was distracted. Oh, totally. Yes, I'll get you that. Things have just been crazy with integration. Can we figure it out next month? Next month became 2 months. 2 months became 6 months. I managed by deferring my associates' bonuses, negotiating extended payment terms with my engineers. 6 months of financial pressure on a business I'd carefully built. 6 months of the cost of having a sister who took everything I gave without remembering to give anything back. Tuesday morning, a black Mercedes pulled up outside my office in the Arts District. The woman who emerged was in her mid-60s with silver hair and expensive casual confidence. She carried a leather portfolio that looked like it contained secrets. My assistant hadn't arrived yet. I met her at the reception desk myself. I apologize for the unannounced visit, the woman said, extending her hand. My name is Margaret Chen. I believe you might remember me, though it was a long time ago. I didn't recognize her, but something in her expression suggested I should. 19 years ago, she began, once we were seated in my conference room, I inherited my family's manufacturing facility when my father died suddenly. He left me no business training, no succession plan, just a complex operation that was bleeding money. She pulled out worn folders containing my architectural drawings, dated 19 years earlier. My analysis, my signature, notes in my handwriting, meticulous and thorough. I was going to close the doors, Margaret continued, sell the land for development, cut my losses. But a young architect was referred to me through a connection at my bank. She opened the portfolio further, revealing photographs of the facility over the years. The building gradually transforming. New roof, updated mechanical systems, reinforced structural elements, better lighting, improved workflow. You spent 8 full weeks analyzing that building, Margaret said. You created a comprehensive retrofit plan that was sophisticated, achievable, and brilliant. When I asked about your fee, you said it would be minimal because I was facing genuine crisis and you believed in the project's potential. I remembered now. One of my first independent projects. After I'd left my previous firm at 26, desperate to establish myself as someone who could think independently. I implemented your plan over 18 months, Margaret continued. The cost was $1.8 million. The result was a facility that operated safely and profitably for 15 years. I sold that facility 5 years ago to a buyer who continues to operate it successfully. The retrofit you designed made that facility worth $4.2 million when I sold it. The larger operation I lead today traces directly back to your intervention. I didn't know what to say. Why come now? I finally asked. Margaret closed her hands over the portfolio. Because 2 weeks ago, I attended a charity gala. A woman named Victoria Hartwell was discussing her development company. She mentioned her sister dismissively, as someone who wasn't really accomplished. She said it loud enough for people to hear. Loud enough to humiliate. Margaret paused. The architect I knew 19 years ago was extraordinary, meticulous, creative, capable of seeing potential where others saw only problems. The way this woman described her sister didn't match that person at all. So I looked into it, and I found her office. And I came here because I wanted to tell you something directly. The work you did for my family wasn't invisible to everyone. It mattered profoundly. And anyone who can't see that is looking at you with fundamentally broken vision. She extended her hand again. I'd like to discuss an opportunity if you have time. Over the next week, Margaret and I met 4 times. She explained that she'd built a substantial portfolio over 19 years. 12 properties across 3 states. Annual revenue, $47 million. None of that exists without your work, she said simply. She offered me a 6-month consulting contract, $180,000, plus equity options. I need someone I can trust completely, she said. Someone who understands how to see potential, who prioritizes integrity over politics. It felt strange, but validating to have someone outside my family circle recognize the impact of my work. Then, almost casually, Margaret mentioned something else. During preliminary audits of my company's financials, we've discovered some unusual transactions involving one of my vice presidents. Nothing I want to discuss in detail right now, but there are patterns that warrant investigation. I'm mentioning it because your work here will intersect with those findings. She didn't elaborate, but the implication hung in the air. Whatever was coming, it would involve more than just structural assessments. For the first time in years, a major professional opportunity had come to me because of my track record, not in spite of family perceptions. I signed the contract the next day. 3 weeks into the restructuring project, I was reviewing property acquisition records when I found the anomalies. Derek Paulson was Margaret's vice president of acquisitions. On paper, phenomenal. In reality, fraudulent. His valuation on the first property, $14.2 million. The independent engineering assessment buried in a subsidiary folder, $11.8 million. Derek had inflated the valuation by 20%. When that came to the board's attention, the independent assessment mysteriously disappeared from the official file. I dug deeper. Property 2. Similar pattern. Property 3. Same inflation, same disappearance. But there was more. Derek had systematically taken over credit for work done by a junior architect named Sarah Chin, Margaret's daughter. Sarah had spent 6 months researching market data, building financial models, drafting the initial proposal. Derek had joined the team only in the final 2 months, then systematically took over credit. Email records showed him directing team members to send all updates through him personally. He then forwarded those updates to executives with slight rephrasings, presenting them as his own ideas. The commission tied to the deal amounted to $240,000, plus the visibility that accelerated his career trajectory. But that was only the beginning. I pulled Derek's expense reports spanning 18 months. Designer furniture purchases labeled as office equipment. $8,400 in custom furnishings that compliance confirmed were installed in his home. Weekend trip to Las Vegas documented as client development meetings. $4,200. A luxury hotel stay in Miami categorized as networking event coordination. $6,800. High-end clothing suits and shoes categorized as professional attire required for executive presentations. $12,000. Country club membership billed as a client entertainment venue. The total fraudulent charges exceeded $160,000. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots. Exported metadata. Access records. I forwarded the comprehensive package to Margaret. She read it in silence, her face remaining carefully neutral. "How thorough is this?" she finally asked. "Airtight," I said. Every item cross-referenced against bank records, credit card statements, travel confirmations. The pattern started small, minor reimbursements that slipped through. As no one questioned him, he got bolder. The last 6 months are significantly more egregious than the first year. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in Margaret's conference room. Derek arrived in a pressed charcoal suit, carrying a leather portfolio, his confidence suggesting he expected this to resolve quickly in his favor. He was catastrophically wrong. Margaret presented the evidence methodically. The inflated valuations and missing assessments. The stolen project credit with email evidence. The fraudulent expenses with receipts and bank statements. Each item was projected on screen. Derek's responses degraded in real time. First, high-pressure deadlines leading to categorization errors. Then, when pressed on specifics. In acquisition work, credit naturally flows to the acquisition's lead. Team dynamics where contribution gets muddled. Finally, I was stressed about wedding planning and performance expectations. The panel remained unmoved. Karen Fletcher, the HR director, delivered the outcome professionally and coldly. Termination for cause, effective immediately for gross misconduct, including fraud and attempted obstruction. The company will pursue civil recovery of all misappropriated funds, totaling $160,847, through legal channels. Given the deliberate nature and scale, authorities will be notified for possible criminal prosecution. Derek's face went pale. He started to speak, stopped, started again. But there was nothing to say. Security appeared promptly. He packed his belongings into a standard box, the humiliation deliberately visible, deliberately permanent. When he passed the glass observation window where I was watching, he had no idea I was there. But I saw his face. The exact moment when the reality of consequences actually landed. When he understood that his choices had destroyed him. 2 months after Derek's termination, I received an invitation to dinner at my Aunt Helen's house in Cherry Creek. The invitation was handwritten, formal, personal. "It's time we had an honest conversation. Please come, Helen." I almost declined, but something in her phrasing suggested this wasn't optional. This was a summons disguised as an invitation. My mother, father, and Victoria were already seated when I arrived. The setup was deliberate. Formal place settings, cloth napkins, a roasted prime rib cooling on the sideboard. This wasn't casual. Aunt Helen had always been the family's quiet observer. She was my mother's oldest sister, widowed young, childless by choice, fiercely independent. She'd lived in the same house for 43 years, maintained careful neutrality in family dynamics, and rarely expressed strong opinions about anything. Until now. She waited until plates were filled before standing at the head of the table. "I've stayed silent too long," she said, voice steady and clear. "This family has treated Rebecca like she doesn't matter for years. I'm done with that." She turned to my parents. When my medical practice was failing 8 years ago, the treatment costs exceeded my savings and insurance. I was ready to mortgage the house. Rebecca paid the remaining bills. Over $40,000. Without telling anyone. She sent the money through the hospital foundation, so I wouldn't know initially. I only found out when a thank you letter arrived addressed to her. My mother's fork paused midair. When Mark lost his job during the recession, Rebecca provided the interest-free loan that got his landscaping business through the first year. $20,000. Repaid slowly over time. No pressure. When Lisa's husband's tech startup was failing and they faced eviction, Rebecca covered 6 months of rent quietly. The room grew quieter. No one met my eyes. "But the worst," Aunt Helen said, voice tightening, "is what happened with your grandfather's education fund. He set aside money specifically for each grandchild. Rebecca's portion was $50,000, intended for her college and early career. You withdrew it all and redirected it to Victoria's accounts." My father's face reddened. "That money was invested for the child with more potential." "No," Aunt Helen cut in. "You decided Rebecca had no potential, so you took what was hers. You stole your daughter's inheritance because you believed in the other one more. And you watched that other one succeed through her own effort and still couldn't acknowledge the sister who was actually capable of extraordinary things." She sat down. The silence was devastating. Driving home from Aunt Helen's house, the weight of 18 years pressed on me differently. Not as burden, as clarity. 1 week later, I changed my phone number. I didn't call to tell anyone. I simply changed it and updated all professional contacts. My office number remained the same. My business email remained the same. But my personal mobile became untraceable. I set up email filters to block any message from family addresses. Letters that arrived at my office were returned unopened. Social media connections were severed. No explanations. No farewell messages. Just silence. The restructuring project with Margaret expanded into something much larger. She offered me a permanent role as Executive Vice President of Strategic Operations. $200,000 annually plus equity options. More importantly, I had an executive team that recognized my value, that asked for my expertise, that implemented my recommendations without question because they understood I delivered results. My independent practice grew substantially through referrals from Margaret's network. I hired 3 additional architects and moved into a larger office space with a view of the skyline. For the first time in my life, my professional operations matched my actual capabilities. The work was purposeful and unencumbered by the weight of trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I didn't matter. Word filtered through distant channels about Victoria. The Hartwell Properties portfolio began experiencing significant problems. Structural issues that competent due diligence should have identified. Management complications. Eventually, financial losses for Corsten Development. An investigation revealed that Victoria had misrepresented the structural integrity of multiple properties. Clients sued. Her reputation suffered. She was reassigned to a smaller division. Her wedding was cancelled. Her fiancé decided he couldn't marry someone whose career was imploding. She took a job at a smaller firm 3 years later at a significantly reduced salary. I heard she was living in an apartment in Aurora, commuting 40 minutes to work every morning. I didn't track it obsessively. I simply didn't care enough to track it at all. My parents aged visibly over the following years. My father retired early, citing health concerns that seemed increasingly psychological. My mother filled empty hours with volunteer work at the library, ironically, a building I had designed and renovated years earlier. Neither found a way back into my life because I no longer left the door open. Some evenings, driving home through Denver, past the courthouse I'd redesigned, past the libraries I'd renovated, past the community centers and schools I'd restructured, I thought about the 18 years spent trying to prove worth to people who refused to see it. The energy once devoted to fixing things for others now fueled my own trajectory. I learned something profound through those years of invisible work. True excellence finds recognition when it's built on genuine capability, not when it's performed to earn approval from people with broken vision. Toxic family dynamics eventually consume themselves, leaving those who perpetuated them isolated in the wreckage of their own choices. Cutting ties completely wasn't cruelty. It was the only way to protect what I'd built and move forward without carrying their weight anymore. The city lights reflected off buildings I'd designed, structures that would serve thousands of people for half a century. My legacy was tangible, permanent, and unshakable. It didn't require their acknowledgement to be real. I was finally free. And the irony was this. In the moment I stopped trying to prove myself to them, I proved myself to everyone else.